My name is Helen, I'm 68 years old, and after my own son called me a burden, I gave his house away to a complete stranger. Before I tell you how a single set of keys led to a brutal custody battle and a fraud investigation, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The young man from the locksmith company smiled at me, his eyes kind. That's it, ma'am. All done. Nobody's getting through that door without one of these new keys. He handed me 2 freshly cut pieces of brass. They felt cold and heavy in my palm. Heavier than you'd think. I paid him in cash, adding a generous tip, and watched through the window as his van pulled away from the curb. Then I turned back to face the door. I took a deep breath, inserted one of the keys into the brand new, gleaming deadbolt and turned it. There was a solid final click. The sound echoed in the empty foyer. I was alone. In my son's house. A house he could no longer enter. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. Did I feel guilty? No. Vengeful? Not even that. What I felt, standing there in the silence, was the immense, crushing weight of a decision there's no coming back from. Mark and his wife Jessica were soaking up the sun in Florida. They had another 5 days of vacation. They had no idea that when they returned to their perfect suburban life here in Denver, they wouldn't even be able to get past their own front porch. You're probably thinking, what kind of mother does this? What kind of monster locks her own child out of his home? To understand how a 68-year-old widow, a woman who spent her life raising a son she adored, ends up changing the locks on that son's home, you have to go back 3 months. To the worst day of my life. The day of my husband's funeral. Robert was my rock. My everything. For 45 years, he was the first person I saw in the morning and the last person I spoke to at night. After the heart attack took him so suddenly, the silence in our little house back in Ohio was a physical thing. It was deafening. The funeral was a blur of black suits, casseroles from neighbors and hollow-sounding condolences. I nodded and hugged and thanked everyone, but I wasn't really there. My son Mark was by my side through it all. He held my arm, he made the arrangements, he spoke beautifully at the service about what a great father Robert had been. He seemed like the perfect grieving son. He and Jessica and my 2 grandchildren flew in from Colorado, and for those few days, having them there was the only thing that kept me from completely falling apart. After everyone had gone home, after the last casserole dish was returned, the real emptiness set in. The house felt huge and cold. Every chair was a reminder that Robert wasn't sitting in it. Every corner held a ghost. I'd wander from room to room just touching his things. His favorite reading glasses on the nightstand, the worn-out flannel shirt still hanging on the back of the closet door. I was drowning in grief and I was utterly alone. A week after the funeral, Mark called. His voice on the phone was a lifeline in that vast, silent house. It was full of concern, the voice of the little boy I'd raised, the man I was so proud of. "Mom," he said, his tone gentle. "I've been so worried about you. Jessica and I have been talking, and we don't think you should be there by yourself." I remember sinking into Robert's armchair, clutching the phone to my ear. "Sell the house, Mom," he urged. "There are too many memories there. It's not healthy. Pack up what you want and come live with us in Denver. You shouldn't be alone. We need you. The kids need their grandma." And in that moment, hearing those words, I felt a flicker of warmth for the first time in weeks. It was a lifeline, a promise of family, of purpose, of not having to face the crushing silence by myself anymore. I believed him. I believed every single word. Selling the house in Ohio felt like tearing out a piece of my own soul. It was more than just brick and mortar. It was the museum of my life with Robert. Every box I taped shut echoed in the sudden emptiness. One box held Robert's old vinyl records, their dusty sleeves smelling of our youth. Another held the delicate quilt my own grandmother had stitched for our wedding day. A silent testament to a love that was supposed to last forever. I packed away photos of Mark taking his first wobbly steps in the very living room I was now dismantling. A room that had once been filled with laughter and the smell of birthday cake. It was a brutal, methodical erasure of my own history. But through it all, Mark's voice on the phone was my North Star. "It's for the best, Mom. You're coming home to us. No more lonely nights." He made it sound like I was moving toward something, not just running away from the ghosts. The day I finally arrived in Denver, the taxi pulled up to their handsome 2-story home in a quiet, tree-lined suburb. The Rocky Mountains loomed in the distance, majestic and indifferent. I paid the driver, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled my 2 suitcases up the pristine concrete driveway. My entire life, what was left of it, was contained in those 2 bags. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the nervous flutter in my chest. This was it. My new beginning. The front door opened before I could even ring the bell. Jessica stood there, a vision of suburban perfection in stylish yoga pants and a crisp white t-shirt. Her smile was bright, wide, and completely hollow. It didn't reach her eyes, which were scanning me from head to toe, as if assessing a piece of furniture that had just been delivered. "Helen, you made it. We were getting worried the flight was delayed." She enveloped me in a quick, stiff hug that smelled of expensive floral perfume and something else, impatience. It felt like hugging a beautifully dressed mannequin. "Hi, honey. It's so good to see you," I said, my voice thick with an emotion she clearly didn't share. I was trying to inject some real warmth into the moment, to bridge the strange gap I already felt opening between us. "Kids, Grandma's here," she called over her shoulder, her voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. My grandchildren, 10-year-old Emily and 8-year-old Josh, trudged into the hallway. They were holding tablets, their faces illuminated by the blue light of whatever game they were playing. They mumbled a simultaneous "Hi, Grandma," without looking up, their thumbs still moving furiously across their screens. A moment later, as if a silent alarm had gone off, they turned and vanished up the carpeted staircase. Mark emerged from a room I assumed was his home office, a phone still pressed to his ear. He gave me a distracted wave, his brow furrowed in concentration. He mouthed the words, "1 minute, big client." Then he too disappeared back into his office. The welcome felt thin, like a coat of paint that doesn't quite cover the old, dark color underneath. It was all performance, a play they were putting on, and I was the unexpected audience member who had shown up on the wrong night. "Let me show you to your room," Jessica said, her bright tone unwavering as she picked up one of my suitcases. "I know you must be absolutely exhausted after the long flight." She led me through a beautiful open-plan kitchen with gleaming granite countertops and a massive stainless steel refrigerator. It was the kind of kitchen you see in magazines, designed for happy family gatherings and laughter over morning coffee. We walked right past it. Then she led me past the main staircase leading up to the bedrooms, the one the children had just run up. I assumed we were heading to a guest room at the end of the hall. Instead, she stopped at another, narrower door. She opened it to reveal a steep set of stairs leading down. "We thought you'd be much more comfortable down here," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the stairwell. "You'll have your own space, your own little retreat. Total privacy." The word retreat sounded lovely. The reality was a finished basement. The air was cool and carried the sharp, chemical smell of fresh paint, mixed with the underlying scent of damp concrete. A pull-out sofa with a faded floral pattern was pushed against the far wall. A small, thin area rug lay on the cold floor, looking like a postage stamp in the large space. In the corner, a mini-fridge hummed a low, mournful tune. The only source of natural light was a single, small window, high up on the wall, offering a depressing view of the sprinkler heads in the lawn and the underside of the deck. This wasn't a guest room. This was storage. This was where they put things they didn't want to look at. Mark finally came down, his phone call finished. He set my other suitcase on the floor with a thud. "So? What do you think, Mom?" "Your own little apartment," he said, his gaze sweeping the room but never landing on me. He was selling it, trying to convince both of us. "It's very private," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "Thank you for making a space for me." That night, after a quiet, stilted dinner where the kids were engrossed in their devices and Mark and Jessica talked about work promotions and the upcoming school fundraiser, I retreated to my basement. I was bone-tired, not from the travel, but from the sheer effort of pretending. Pretending I wasn't hurt. Pretending I wasn't terrified that I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. Just as I was about to unfold the lumpy mattress of the sofa bed, Jessica appeared at the bottom of the stairs. She was holding a sheet of paper, neatly encased in a plastic sleeve, the kind you use for important documents. "Helen," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. "Mark and I just wanted to go over a few things to make this transition as smooth as possible for everyone. We've found that clear expectations are the key to a happy household. So we put together some little house guidelines." She handed me the paper. It was a list. a typed-out bullet-pointed list under the heading, Evan's Household Harmony Plan. My eyes scanned the points. Designated laundry days for me, Tuesdays and Thursdays between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. only. A schedule for when I could use the main living room TV, mostly weekday mornings when everyone was out. And then I saw the line that made my stomach physically clench, the words blurring for a second before snapping into sharp, cruel focus. To help teach the children about budgeting and planning, and to maintain inventory, please ask before helping yourself to any food or beverages from the main pantry or refrigerator. I stared at the words, the blood draining from my face. I looked up at her, my mouth suddenly dry, unable to form a word. I felt like I was outside of my own body, watching this happen to some other pathetic old woman. She just smiled that thin plastic smile. It's just to keep things organized. You know how it is. It helps me with the grocery planning. I just nodded. I couldn't trust myself to speak. After she finally ascended the stairs, her footsteps light and unbothered, I sat on the edge of that hard, unfamiliar sofa bed and unfolded the single, threadbare towel they'd left for me at its foot. I felt like a stranger, an intruder in a foreign land. I had sold my home, dismantled my life, left everything I had ever known. All for this. For a cold basement room and a set of rules that treated me like a child, like a problem to be managed. I told myself I was overreacting, that they were just stressed, that they were adjusting. But as I lay in the dark, listening to the muffled sounds of their real lives happening on the floor directly above my head, a cold dread began to creep into my heart. I didn't know it then, but that laminated list of rules? It wasn't a plan for harmony. It was the opening shot in a war I didn't even know I was fighting. The first week was a masterclass in feeling invisible. It was a strange and painful education. I'd come upstairs in the mornings, my heart clinging to a foolish shred of hope for a cup of coffee and some simple conversation, only to find the kitchen in a state of chaotic departure. Mark would have already left for work, and Jessica would be in a frantic whirlwind, packing lunches and shouting reminders at the kids. My quiet good morning was usually met with a hurried hey thrown over a shoulder as they flew past me. I wasn't a person. I was a piece of furniture they had to navigate around. I tried to make myself useful, to find a purpose in their polished, busy world. I'd do my laundry, strictly within my allotted time on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'd tidy up the living room after the kids had left a trail of toys and snack wrappers, straightening the expensive cushions on the couch. I'd quietly unload the dishwasher, stacking the plates with care. I did it all silently, carefully, like a mouse scurrying in the walls, trying to earn my keep, trying to be something other than an object in their basement. My efforts were never acknowledged. The house would just be magically clean, and no one ever said a word. It was the cruelest kind of erasure, as if a ghost were tidying up after them. The rule about the food was a constant daily humiliation that ground me down bit by bit. I, a 68-year-old woman who had cooked thousands of meals for her family, now had to ask for permission to eat. My life became a series of deferential questions. Jessica, would it be all right if I had one of the bananas on the counter? Jessica, do you mind if I make myself a small sandwich for lunch? I can use the very end of the bread loaf. Each time she'd pause whatever she was doing on her laptop, give a little theatrical sigh as if I'd interrupted a crucial international summit, and say, "Of course, Helen. Help yourself." But her tone, the slight edge in her voice, made it feel like a huge imposition. It made me feel like a beggar. Robert and I had poured a significant portion of our retirement savings, a small inheritance from his parents, into the down payment for this very house. We'd helped fund the college fund for those grandchildren who now barely looked at me. And here I was, practically begging for permission to eat an apple in a kitchen I had helped pay for. The breaking point, the moment the little cracks of doubt and hurt in my heart turned into a gaping, irreparable chasm, happened about 10 days after I arrived. It was a Wednesday morning. I woke up early, my stomach rumbling with a nervous hunger. I hadn't eaten much the night before because Jessica had made a comment about how quickly the groceries were disappearing, and I didn't want to be a bother. I went upstairs rehearsing my little speech. "Jessica, I'm feeling a bit peckish. Would it be all right if I had a small bowl of oatmeal?" The kitchen was quiet. Sunlight was just starting to stream through the large window over the sink. I saw Jessica standing in front of the walk-in pantry, a spacious closet that was always meticulously organized. Her back was to me. I heard a strange sound, a metallic scraping noise, followed by a sharp, decisive click. She turned around and my eyes went from her face down to her hands, and then to the pantry door. My brain couldn't quite process what I was seeing. She was holding a small, gleaming brass padlock in her hand. A brand new hasp had been screwed into the pantry door and its frame, and the padlock was now securely fastened through it. My voice was barely a whisper, a dry rustle of sound in my throat. "Jessica, what are you doing?" She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed or embarrassed. She held my gaze, her expression perfectly composed, almost triumphant. "Oh, good morning, Helen," she said, her voice as smooth and cool as the granite countertops. "We've had a bit of a mouse problem. Can you believe it? In a house this new. This is just a temporary measure. You know, to keep things secure until the exterminator can come." A mouse problem. The lie was so audacious, so insulting that it felt like a slap in the face. We both knew there were no mice. The only pest she was trying to keep out was me. I just stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, a hot flush of shame so intense it felt like I was on fire. She was locking up the food. From me. Her husband's mother. That night I knew I couldn't let it go. This was a line that could not be uncrossed. I had to talk to Mark, to appeal to the son I thought I knew. I waited until Jessica was upstairs, a loud and performative phone call with her sister echoing through the house. I found Mark in his office, the glow of his computer screen reflecting in his glasses. "Mark, we need to talk," I said, closing the door softly behind me. He swiveled in his chair, a flicker of annoyance on his face that he quickly tried to hide. "Mom, I'm kind of in the middle of a big project. I have a deadline tomorrow. This won't take long," I insisted, my hands trembling so hard I clasped them together. "Mark, please, what is going on? The rules, the basement." "Mark, Jessica put a padlock on the pantry today. She told me it was for mice." He had the grace to look away, to stare at his desk, unable to meet my eyes. He started shuffling a stack of papers that didn't need shuffling. "Look, Mom, Jessica is just... She gets these ideas. She's very organized. She likes things a certain way. She's been under a lot of stress with her new promotion at work, and the salary increase comes with a lot of pressure. This isn't about being organized." My voice cracked and I fought to keep it steady. "This is cruel. This is humiliating. I feel like a prisoner here. I sold my home, Mark. I gave up my entire life to be with you, to be with my family." He ran a hand through his hair, looking trapped, a cornered animal. "I know, Mom, I know. It's just an adjustment period for everyone. We'll figure it out." Just then the office door opened without a knock. Jessica stood there, wrapped in a plush white robe, her arms crossed over her chest. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her eyes were like chips of ice, and she just looked from me to Mark, a silent, powerful command hanging in the air. I saw the change in Mark immediately. It was as if a string inside him had been cut. His shoulders slumped. The brief flicker of the conflicted son I knew, the boy I raised, was extinguished. He wouldn't look at me. He looked at the floor, at his expensive desk, anywhere but at his mother who was standing there, pleading for a shred of dignity. He cleared his throat. His voice was low, almost a murmur, and the words he said will be etched into the scar tissue of my memory until the day I die. "Mom," he whispered, his eyes fixed on a spot on the Persian rug. "This is our house now. You're not a guest here. You're a burden. A burden." The word didn't just hang in the air. It landed on me with a physical weight, a toxic cloud that sucked all the oxygen out of the room. It was a punch to the gut that left me breathless and hollow. I looked at the face of my son, the boy whose fevers I'd nursed, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose teenage heartbreaks I'd soothed with ice cream and patience. And I saw a stranger. A weak, cruel stranger who had just shattered his mother's heart into a million pieces to appease his wife. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there for a heartbeat, the life draining out of me. I gave a single sharp nod, a gesture of concession in a battle I hadn't even known I was fighting. I turned around and walked out of the room. As I walked down the stairs to my cold basement prison, I thought that was the lowest they could go. That was the absolute worst of it. How could anything be worse than your own child calling you a burden? I was so naive. I was wrong. After that night in the office, something inside me didn't just break. It shattered and then reformed into something hard and protective, like scar tissue. The small warm ember of hope I'd been clinging to was snuffed out completely, leaving behind nothing but cold ash. I stopped trying. I became a true ghost in their house, a silent peripheral figure they could easily ignore. I spent most of my days in the basement. It was no longer a retreat, it was my cell. I read the old paperbacks I'd brought from home until the words blurred on the page. I only ventured upstairs to use the bathroom, my movements quick and furtive, like a mouse avoiding the cat. I ate the simple things I kept in my humming mini-fridge: yogurt, a piece of fruit, a granola bar. Once a week, on Tuesday mornings when I knew they would be out, I would make a solitary, shame-filled trip to the grocery store to replenish my meager supplies. The silence from them was absolute. It was a living, breathing entity in the house. They walked past the basement door as if it were a wall. I would hear them laughing upstairs, the sound of a movie night, the cheerful chaos of the kids getting ready for school. It was the sound of a life I was not a part of, a family that had surgically removed me from its body. It was a cold, quiet, and exquisitely cruel form of torture. About 2 weeks after the Burden incident, my emotional numbness was pierced by a fresh stab of pain. I was coming up the stairs to get a glass of water, moving as silently as possible, when I overheard Jessica making an announcement at the dinner table. Her voice was giddy with excitement, a tone she never used with me. "I just booked the tickets," she squealed, and I could practically hear her clapping her hands. "1 week in Florida. The resort has a private beach and a water park for the kids. It's going to be absolutely amazing. A much-needed break." Emily and Josh cheered loudly. I heard Mark's deeper voice murmur something appreciative. I froze on the stairs, hidden in the shadows of the hallway, my hand clutching the banister. Jessica continued, her voice dripping with a false saccharine sweetness that I now recognized as her primary weapon. "It's just a little trip for us, you know? A chance for our nuclear family to reconnect and recharge." She said the words nuclear family with a sharp, deliberate emphasis, a verbal dagger aimed directly at the ghost on the stairs. I didn't need to hear anymore. I wasn't invited. Of course I wasn't invited. I was the burden, the unwanted attachment, the problem that they needed a vacation from. I quietly retreated back down to the basement before they could see me, a lump of ice forming in my stomach. The humiliation was a physical thing, a bitter taste at the back of my throat. The morning they were set to leave was a flurry of chaotic activity. Suitcases being rolled across the hardwood floors, excited chatter from the kids about swimming with dolphins, Jessica barking orders about sunscreen and passports. I stayed in my room, a voluntary exile, not wanting to be in their way, not wanting to see the happiness from which I was so thoroughly excluded. Just before they walked out the door to the garage, Mark came downstairs. He didn't come all the way into the room. He just stood at the bottom of the steps, holding a few crumpled bills in his hand. He wouldn't look at me. "Mom," he said, his gaze fixed on the wall behind me, as if he were addressing the concrete. "Here's $100. That should be enough to get you some groceries for the week while we're gone." He held out the money. 5 $20 bills. I just looked at his hand, at the money that felt more like an insult than an act of care. This was my allowance, my payment for staying out of their way. From the son whose entire college education Robert and I had paid for, whose wedding we had funded, whose house we had helped buy. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. He shifted his weight, clearly wanting to flee. I'll leave it here on the end table for you," he said, his voice strained. He quickly placed the bills on the small table by the stairs. He turned to leave, then hesitated for a fraction of a second. "The house alarm is set. The code is on a sticky note on the fridge. Just, stay safe." And then he was gone, his footsteps hurrying back up the stairs, eager to escape the suffocating awkwardness of the moment. The sound of their SUV starting in the garage and pulling out of the driveway was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Then silence. A deep, profound, and absolute silence. It was so different from the lonely silence after Robert died. That silence was filled with grief. This silence was filled with emptiness. It felt final. After a few hours, a gnawing hunger began to assert itself. I decided I would use the $100, his guilt money, and go to the store. I put on my coat and walked up the stairs. The house was unnervingly still and tidy, as if no one lived there at all. As I walked through the immaculate garage to get to my car, I passed the large trash and recycling bins they had rolled out to the curb for pickup day. Something caught my eye. Sticking out of the top of the dark green trash can was the corner of a familiar cardboard box from the local supermarket, the one known for its delicious, savory rotisserie chickens. Curiosity, or maybe some darker instinct, got the better of me. It made no sense. Why would they throw out a whole box? I lifted the heavy plastic lid, and I saw it. My breath caught in my throat. It felt like the world tilted on its axis and stopped turning. Sitting right on top of the clean white trash bags were 2 whole uneaten loaves of sourdough bread, still in their bakery bags. And nestled right next to them, still in its clear plastic dome container, was a perfectly browned, completely untouched rotisserie chicken. I stared, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. They weren't old. They weren't spoiled. I could see the expiration date on the chicken through the plastic. It wasn't for another 4 days. The realization hit me not like a wave, but like a single perfectly aimed bullet to the heart. They had bought this food, and they had deliberately, consciously, thrown it in the trash can rather than leave it in the refrigerator for their mother. For the burden in the basement. They would rather see good food rot in a landfill than allow me to eat it. Let me ask you to just stop and think about that for a second. I want you to truly picture it. Imagine your own child, the person you brought into this world, the person you love more than life itself, choosing to throw perfectly good food into the garbage rather than let you, their mother, have it. In that moment, standing in that cold, silent garage, staring into that trash can, something inside me didn't just break. It calcified. It turned from grief and sadness and humiliation into something hard, and cold, and as clear as ice. The tears I thought I would cry never came. Instead, a slow burning, and utterly tranquil calm washed over me. I slowly, deliberately, closed the lid of the trash can. The sound was a soft thud. The game was over. They had made their final move. Now it was my turn. I didn't go to the grocery store. I turned around, my steps measured and sure, and walked back into the silent house. The image of that chicken in the trash was burned into my mind, a permanent searing brand. It wasn't just about food, I understood that with perfect chilling clarity. It was a message. It was a declaration of my worthlessness in their eyes. I was less than garbage. The deep, abiding grief I had been carrying for months, the constant, gnawing hurt of their rejection, the stinging humiliation. It all evaporated in that single moment of clarity. In its place was a strange and powerful calm. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was simply done. I was done being the victim. I was done being invisible. I was done playing by their cruel and twisted rules. I walked straight past the kitchen, past the pantry with its insulting brass padlock, and went up the stairs to the 2nd floor. I had only been up there once on the day I arrived, and I had felt like a trespasser then. Now I felt a sense of ownership. I went directly to the room they used as a home office. Jessica was meticulous, obsessively organized, a trait she now wielded as a weapon. But I knew that her obsession with order was about to become her undoing. I knew that if there was any important paperwork, it would be filed away perfectly, just waiting for me. On the far wall stood a tall, gray metal filing cabinet, the kind you see in a doctor's office. It looked cold and impersonal. I pulled open the top drawer. It slid out with a smooth, expensive sound. It was filled with hanging folders, each with a neat, typed label created by a label maker. Auto insurance, bank statements, medical records, kids' school reports. My eyes scanned the labels, my heart beating a slow, steady, determined rhythm. And then I saw it, tucked between property taxes and retirement accounts. A folder labeled simply, Property. My heart gave a single hard thud against my ribs. My hand was perfectly steady as I lifted the folder out of the drawer. It felt heavy, substantial. Inside was a thick stack of papers held together with a large black binder clip. I saw mortgage statements, property tax records from the county, and at the very back, a multi-page document with a title in bold, official-looking letters at the top, warranty deed. I took the document over to Mark's expensive desk and sat down in his high-backed leather office chair. It felt comfortable. It felt powerful. I switched on the sleek desk lamp, and the focused pool of light illuminated the pages. I started reading. It was full of dense legal jargon I didn't fully understand, grantor, grantee, covenants and restrictions. But I wasn't looking for the fine print. I was looking for one thing and one thing only, the names. And then I found them. On the second page, under the section titled Grantee, the legal term for the owner were 3 names typed in crisp black ink. Mark Evans, Jessica Evans, and Helen Evans. My name. A flood of memories so vivid it was like watching a movie washed over me. I was transported back 10 years. Robert was still alive, his laugh still echoing in my ears. He was healthy and vibrant, always planning our next trip. Mark and Jessica were so excited about buying their first home, this very house, but they were young and struggling to come up with the massive down payment the bank was demanding. It was the height of the market, and they needed a huge sum, 20% of the purchase price, to get their mortgage approved. I remembered the conversation as if it were yesterday, sitting around our old oak kitchen table in Ohio. Robert and I had just received a small but significant inheritance from his aunt, a woman who had lived frugally her entire life. It wasn't a life-changing fortune, but it was enough. It was our nest egg for the future. "We'll give you the money for the down payment," Robert had told Mark, his voice full of fatherly pride and generosity. "It's not a loan. It's a gift to help you get started. But we have one condition, son. We want our names on the deed with you. Not because we don't trust you, but for security. It's a big chunk of our savings. It's just to protect the investment for all of us." Mark and Jessica had agreed immediately, their faces alight with gratitude and relief. They had thanked us profusely, telling us how much it meant to them, how we were making their dreams come true. We had gone to the lawyer's office, signed the papers, and the lawyer had explained that it meant we were co-owners with equal rights. We never thought about it again. We assumed that eventually, once they were more established, they would refinance the mortgage or have our names legally removed. We trusted them. Apparently, in their arrogance and carelessness, they never had. I sat there in that silent, sunlit office, staring at my own name on the deed to the house where I was a prisoner. The house where I was considered a burden. The house where food was locked away from me as if I were a feral animal. They owned the house. But so did I. Legally, I was just as much the owner as they were. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a joyful smile. It was the grim, satisfied smile of a woman who had just been handed a loaded gun in the middle of a war she hadn't started but was now determined to finish. I carefully folded the deed, slipped it into my purse, and walked out of the office, closing the door softly behind me. Back downstairs in my basement retreat, I sat on the lumpy sofa bed and took out my cell phone. The path forward was suddenly, dazzlingly crystal clear. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I made 3 phone calls. My voice was calm, even, and full of a purpose I hadn't felt in years. The first call was to a 24-hour locksmith service I found on Google. "Yes, hello," I said to the dispatcher. "My name is Helen Evans. I need to schedule a service to have all the exterior locks on my house changed, including the front door, the back door, and the garage. I am one of the legal owners of the property." The second call was to a clean, simple motel a few miles away, one that offered weekly rates. "I'd like to book a room for one, please. Starting tonight. I'm not sure how long I'll be staying, so a weekly rate would be perfect." The third and final call was to the highest-rated real estate lawyer in Denver, a man named Arthur Davis whose website said he specialized in property disputes. "My name is Helen Evans," I said to the polite receptionist, "and I need to book an urgent consultation with Mr. Davis regarding a property I co-own. It's a matter of some delicacy." With the deed in my purse and those 3 appointments set in motion, I started to pack my 2 small suitcases. I wasn't just packing my clothes and the few belongings I had brought with me. I was packing up my old life, the one where I was a victim, a burden, a ghost. They had made a critical, arrogant mistake. They had underestimated the woman they had tried so hard to erase. And they were about to find out just how big of a mistake that was. The first small act of rebellion was intoxicating. The locksmith I called was a young man with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. I didn't have him change the main locks yet. That was a step I was saving. Instead, I had him change only the lock on the basement door, fitting it with a sturdy, high-quality deadbolt that I could lock from the inside. He handed me the 2 new keys. "That should keep you safe, ma'am," he said. Holding those small, solid pieces of metal in my hand felt like holding a shield. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of agency of control. That night, I didn't stay in the basement. I checked into the motel. The room was generic and smelled of industrial cleaner, but the bed was clean, the door had a solid lock, and I slept more soundly on that cheap, firm mattress than I had on that lumpy, insulting pull-out sofa. The next morning, I met with the lawyer, Mr. Davis. His office was on the top floor of a gleaming downtown skyscraper, with a panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains. He was an older man, probably in his late 60s like me, with a calm, reassuring demeanor and eyes that seemed to see everything. He listened patiently without a single interruption, as I laid out the whole sordid story. I didn't get emotional. I didn't cry. I presented the facts as clearly and concisely as I could. The move, the basement, the laminated rules, the locked pantry, the burden comment, the chicken in the trash. When I finished, I pushed the copy of the deed across his polished mahogany desk. He put on his reading glasses and studied it for a long, silent moment. He read every line, his brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, he took off his glasses and looked up at me, his expression serious. "Well, Mrs. Evans," he said, his voice even and strong. "Based on this legally filed and recorded document, the situation is quite clear. You are a 50% owner of the property located at 123 Maple Drive. You are what's known as a tenant in common. You have every legal right to reside there, to access all parts of the property, and to have guests as you see fit. They cannot legally restrict your access to any part of the house, including the pantry. Their actions could even be construed as an illegal eviction." Hearing him say it, hearing the legal confirmation of what I already knew, was like a steel rod being inserted into my spine. It wasn't just my hurt feelings anymore. It was the law. "So what are my options?" I asked, my voice steady. "You have several," he said, leaning forward. "You could file a petition lawsuit to force a sale of the property. The court would order the house to be sold, and you would receive your 50% of the proceeds after the mortgage is paid off. Given the increase in property values in Denver, that would be a substantial sum. We could also sue them for financial damages related to the inheritance you provided, as well as for emotional distress. Or," he paused, looking at me intently, his eyes searching my face, "you could simply exercise your rights as an owner and see what happens." I thought about forcing a sale. The money would be nice. It was my money, after all, the result of Robert's and my lifelong savings and his aunt's inheritance. But it felt incomplete. Felt too easy for them. They would just take their share of the money and buy another beautiful house and continue on with their perfect lives, having learned nothing. This wasn't just about the money they owed me. This was about the respect they had denied me. It was about the humanity they had tried to strip from me piece by painful piece. "I have another idea," I said, and a new, bolder plan began to form in my mind. "I don't want to force a sale just yet. I want to stay. And I want to change my will." For the next hour, we discussed the process of rewriting my will, completely removing Mark as a beneficiary of any of my assets. Then I told him the rest of my plan. He raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing on his lips. "That's an unconventional approach, Mrs. Evans," he said. "But it is entirely within your legal rights." That evening, back in the solitude of my sterile motel room, I did something I hadn't done in a while. I logged onto Facebook. I wasn't looking for pictures of my grandchildren playing soccer or family vacation photos. I was looking for something else entirely. I remembered a friend from my old church group back in Ohio who used to share posts from a local women's shelter. On a hunch, I searched for similar organizations in the Denver area. And that's when I saw her face. The post was from a well-respected local charity that helped families in crisis. It was a desperate plea. It featured a grainy, poorly lit photo of a young woman with dark, tired, and deeply fearful eyes. She was clutching the hands of two small children, a little boy and a younger girl, who were huddled against her legs. Her name was Sarah. The post explained in careful, discreet language that she had finally found the courage to leave an abusive husband, but she had nowhere to go. The local shelters were full. She and her kids were sleeping in her beat-up old car. They needed a miracle, the post said. I looked at Sarah's face, at the exhaustion and terror etched into her features, And I didn't just see a stranger. I saw a reflection of my own desperation, my own feeling of being trapped and powerless. We were both women who had been made to feel worthless by the people who were supposed to love us. But I had something she didn't. I had a key. I had a house. I had power. My hand was shaking as I picked up the phone and called the number listed on the post. I explained the situation to the cautious but kind volunteer who answered. I told her I was a co-owner of a large 3-bedroom house in a safe suburban neighborhood, and that I had a safe place for Sarah and her children to stay. The volunteer was understandably skeptical. She asked a lot of questions, but I answered them all calmly and honestly. 2 days later, she arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a small, quiet coffee shop downtown. When Sarah walked in, she looked even more exhausted and fragile than in her photo. She clutched a worn-out backpack to her chest like a shield and wouldn't make eye contact with me. I bought her a coffee and a hot chocolate for her kids, who sat silently beside her. And I told her my story. Not the whole thing, but enough. I told her I understood what it felt like to not have a safe place to call home, to be made to feel like a burden. I have a house, I said, my voice steady and clear. There are 3 empty bedrooms upstairs. My family is away for an extended period. The space is empty. It's yours for as long as you and your children need it. No strings attached. She finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with a raw mixture of disbelief, suspicion, and desperate, heartbreaking hope. Why? Why would you do this for me? You're a stranger. Because no one deserves to feel like they don't have a home, I said simply. The rent is $1 a month. This isn't charity, Sarah. This is a course correction. I opened my purse and pulled out the brand new key to the front door. The one I'd had made before I finalized my plan to change all the locks. I slid it across the smooth surface of the table, came to a stop right in front of her. Her hand trembled as she reached out and her fingers closed around it. Seeing the single silent tear that rolled down her dusty cheek, I knew with every fiber of my being that I had made the right choice. This was better than any financial settlement. This was justice. I had given Sarah the key. I had opened the door for her and her children. But I had no idea that in doing so, I was also opening the door to a storm of retaliation from my son and his wife. A storm that would be more vicious, more personal, and more cruel than anything I could have ever imagined. For 5 glorious days, the house on Maple Drive was a haven. It was transformed. Sarah and her 2 children, a quiet, watchful 6-year-old boy named Leo and a shy 4-year-old girl named Maya, moved in with just 2 duffel bags and a cardboard box of toys. They were timid at first, like little birds startled from their nest. They whispered to each other and walked on tiptoes, as if they were afraid the house itself might reject them or that the kindness was a trick. I gave them the entire upstairs floor. The spacious master bedroom with its ensuite bathroom, the 2 colorful kids' rooms, it was all theirs. I stayed in the basement, but it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like my command center. I was the guardian of the sanctuary we were building. The first time I heard the kids laugh, a real, genuine, unrestrained peal of laughter as they chased each other through the sprinklers in the backyard. It was a sweeter sound than any music I had ever heard. Sarah and I unlocked the pantry together. When she saw the shelves fully stocked with cereal, pasta, and snacks, she actually broke down and cried, leaning against the doorframe. I haven't seen this much food in one place in. I can't even remember, she whispered. We were starting to build something new. A small, fragile fortress of kindness and healing in the shell of my son's cold, perfect house. Then, on a Sunday evening, the bubble burst. My phone, which had been silent for days, suddenly rang. The caller ID flashed the name Mark. My heart hammered once against my ribs, a jolt of pure adrenaline, then settled into a cold, steady rhythm. I was ready. I let it ring twice, took a deep breath, and answered. Hello, Mark. The voice on the other end was a strangled, sputtering mix of confusion and pure rage. Mom? What the hell is going on? We're here. At the house. The key isn't working. The damn key won't turn. What did you do? I could hear Jessica screaming in the background, her voice a shrill, piercing shriek. I told you she was unstable. I told you she would do something crazy. This is all your fault for bringing her here. I kept my own voice perfectly calm, a sea of tranquility against their storm. The locks have been changed, Mark. For security reasons. For security? What are you talking about? Let us in. We're standing on our own front porch with our children. It's getting dark, he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. That's the thing, Mark, I said, and the words came out clear and cold as a winter morning, each one a perfectly formed icicle. It's my porch too. And you're no longer welcome here. I hung up the phone before he could respond. The retaliation started within hours. It was swift and brutal. First came the barrage of text messages, a torrent of digital venom that lit up my phone screen again and again. Marks were a pathetic mix of pleading and angry threats. Mom, this is insane. You're destroying our family. You can't legally do this. And think about your grandchildren. Jessica's were pure poison, devoid of any pretense. You ungrateful old hag. We took you in out of pity, and this is how you repay us? You've made a huge mistake. You will regret this. I read each one, then calmly deleted the entire thread without replying. The next morning, I walked out to my car to take Sarah to a job interview she had lined up. And I saw it. All 4 of my tires were flat. Not just deflated from a slow leak. They had been deliberately and violently slashed. There were long, deep, angry gashes in the rubber of each one. It was an act of pure, impotent rage. I didn't need a detective to tell me who had done it. The police report I filed felt like a hollow formality, but I knew it was important to start a paper trail. The officer who came was polite but dismissive. Family disputes, he sighed, scribbling on his notepad. They get messy. But the physical destruction was nothing compared to what came next. Jessica, I learned, was a masterful practitioner of a different, more insidious kind of warfare. A few days later, Sarah came to me, her face pale, her hands trembling as she held out her phone. She showed me a post from the official neighborhood Facebook group, a private page for the residents of our subdivision. The post was from an anonymous account, a new profile with no friends or pictures, named something generic like concerned neighbor. But the words, the specific turns of phrase, were unmistakably Jessica's venom, now disguised as a worried public service announcement. It read, "Warning to all residents of Maple Drive and the surrounding streets. An unstable elderly woman has recently taken over a home on our street after a serious family dispute. We have reason to believe she is mentally unwell. She has moved in several strangers of unknown background, including small children. We don't know their history or what they are capable of. Please be vigilant, lock your doors, and keep a close eye on your children when they are playing outside." My blood ran cold. This was a new level of evil. She wasn't just attacking me anymore. She was targeting Sarah, a victim of domestic abuse, and painting her and her innocent children as a dangerous threat to the entire neighborhood. The effect was immediate and devastating. When Sarah and I walked to the little park at the end of the street, neighbors who used to wave would now abruptly turn away, pretending to be busy with their gardening or hurrying inside. I saw one woman, who I'd had a pleasant chat with just a week before, physically pull her child closer to her as we passed, her eyes filled with suspicion and fear. We were being isolated, ostracized, turned into the neighborhood monsters. Jessica was turning our safe haven into an island, surrounded by a sea of her own poison. I looked at Sarah's face, which was etched with a new kind of terror. She had escaped her abusive husband only to be publicly shamed and vilified by my son's wife. I had promised her safety, and instead I had put a giant blinking target on her back. I realized then that I was dealing with a level of cruelty and malice that had no bottom. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was far from over. This wasn't the end of their retaliation. This was just the beginning. The public shaming on the neighborhood Facebook page was a cruel and calculated attack, designed to isolate us and make us feel like pariahs. It worked. The friendly waves from neighbors ceased, replaced by suspicious stares and curtains that twitched when we walked by. But what they did next went beyond social cruelty. It was a weaponized act of malice, an attack so low and so vile that it aimed to destroy not just my reputation, but the fragile new life Sarah was trying to build for her children. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about a week after the Facebook post appeared. The kids were quietly coloring at the kitchen table, the afternoon sun streaming in, and Sarah and I were having a cup of tea. For a brief, blissful moment it felt normal, felt like a home. Then came the sharp, official-sounding knock at the front door. My stomach lurched. It wasn't the knock of a delivery driver or a friendly neighbor. It was a knock that meant business. I opened the door to find two people standing on the porch. A woman in a crisp, conservative blouse holding a clipboard, and a stern-looking man in a cheap, ill-fitting suit. They looked serious. They looked like trouble. "Are you Helen Evans?" the woman asked, her eyes already scanning the inside of the house behind me, taking in every detail. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" I asked, my hand tightening on the doorknob. "We're from the Denver Department of Child Protective Services," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion as she flashed a laminated badge. "We've received an anonymous report expressing serious concern for the welfare of the children, Leo and Maya Jenkins, who are currently residing at this address. CPS. Child Protective Services." The words alone were enough to strike a primal terror into the heart of any parent or guardian. This was Jessica's doing. It had to be. An anonymous report. It was her signature move, the cowardly act of a snake hiding in the grass. I felt Sarah come up behind me. I heard her sharp, terrified intake of breath. I could feel her whole body tense. For a woman who had fought to escape an abusive monster to protect her children, there could be no greater fear than having them taken away by the state. For the next 2 hours they turned our lives, our safe haven, upside down. They had to follow procedure, they said, their voices clipped and professional. They separated us immediately. The man, whose name was Mr. Harris, took a trembling Sarah into the living room to conduct a formal interview. The woman, Ms. Albright, sat me down at my own kitchen table and began her interrogation. Her questions were a barrage of thinly veiled accusations. Was I mentally stable? Did I have a history of erratic or violent behavior? What was the nature of my dispute with my son? Was I financially equipped to have children in my home? Was I a danger to them? Each question was a poison dart, designed to paint me as an unhinged old woman who had put innocent children at risk. I answered every question calmly, truthfully, but I felt my anger simmering just below the surface. But the worst part, the part that felt like a physical violation, was when they interviewed the children. They took Leo and Maya out into the backyard, one at a time, away from their mother. I watched through the kitchen window, my hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table, as these two strangers asked my sweet, traumatized little houseguests questions I couldn't hear. I saw Leo, usually so quiet and watchful, shaking his head, his small face tight with fear and confusion. I saw Maya shrink away from Miss Albright, clutching her small teddy bear to her chest. They were re-traumatizing these children who had already been through so much. When they were finally done, they gathered us all in the foyer like a group of suspected criminals. Miss Albright delivered their verdict with cold, bureaucratic finality. "We have found no immediate cause for the removal of the children at this time," she said, and I felt Sarah sway slightly beside me. "However, due to the nature of the allegations in the report, this case will remain open pending a full investigation. We will be making unannounced follow-up visits, and we will be contacting the children's father." The mention of their father, Sarah's abusive ex-husband, was the final vicious twist of the knife. Jessica knew exactly what she was doing. She was not only trying to get the children taken away, she was reintroducing a violent man back into their lives. The moment the front door closed, Sarah's composure, which had been held together by the thinnest of threads, completely crumbled. She sank onto the bottom step of the staircase and buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with deep, silent sobs. The children, sensing their mother's distress, ran to her, wrapping their small arms around her neck. "They want to take my babies," she whispered, her voice choked with tears and terror. "That's what this is about. They'll use my past, they'll use my ex-husband against me. They'll do anything to take them away from me just to get back at you. They want to destroy us, Helen. They want to ruin everything." Look, I know this part of the story is hard to hear. Believe me, it was 1,000 times harder to live through. But I need you to stay with me because this was the moment. This was the point of no return. Seeing that brave mother crying on my stairs, terrified of losing her children because of my toxic family drama. That was the moment I stopped defending and started attacking. They had crossed a sacred, unforgivable line. They had used innocent children as pawns in their sick, twisted game of revenge. As I knelt down on the floor and put my arm around Sarah's shaking shoulders, promising her with a conviction I didn't know I possessed that I would never, ever let that happen, a cold, hard resolve settled over me like a sheet of ice. This was no longer just about a house or a stolen inheritance. This was about good versus evil. This was about protecting the innocent. That night, long after Sarah and the kids were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating my face in the dark. The house was quiet again, but this time it was the heavy, charged silence of a battlefield before the dawn. I opened a new email and addressed it to my lawyer, Mr. Davis. The subject line was just one word: war. In the body of the email I wrote, "They called Child Protective Services on a single mother and her 2 children. They will stop at nothing. This is no longer a civil dispute. This is an attempt to destroy lives. We need to stop them first. I need you to hire the best private investigator you know. Right now, I have a terrible feeling my son is hiding something much, much worse than just a cruel heart." Mr. Davis moved with the speed and precision of a seasoned general. The private investigator he hired was a man named Frank Rizzo, a retired Denver police detective with a bulldog's face, a rumpled trench coat, and eyes that seemed to see right through you. I met him once briefly in Mr. Davis's office. He didn't say much. He just listened to the whole story, from the basement to the CPS visit, taking concise notes in a small worn-out spiral notebook. He never showed any emotion, but when I mentioned the false CPS report, I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. When I was done, he just nodded slowly and said, "I'll get back to you." He inspired a strange kind of confidence. While Frank started digging into the dark corners of my son's life, I focused on making the house a fortress. I spent a few $1,000s from my savings on a state-of-the-art security camera system. We had high-definition cameras installed covering the front porch, the driveway, the backyard, and the street in both directions. The sense of being watched was unsettling, but the fear of what could happen if we weren't was far worse. We lived in a state of low-grade anxiety. Every knock at the door made us jump. An unannounced follow-up visit from a new, even more suspicious CPS caseworker left Sarah shaken for days. We were prisoners in our own safe haven. Less than a week later, Frank called Mr. Davis. And what he'd found was worse than anything I could have ever imagined. It was a level of betrayal so profound, so calculated, that it literally took my breath away. Mr. Davis summoned me to his office immediately. When I walked in, he wasn't sitting behind his desk. He was standing by the window, looking out at the mountains, his shoulders slumped. He turned to face me, and his expression was grim. "Helen," he said, his voice heavy, "I'm afraid the situation with your son is more serious than we thought. This is no longer just a family dispute. This is criminal." On his polished mahogany desk was a thick manila folder, and its contents were fanned out like a losing hand of cards. They were copies of credit card statements. Dozens and dozens of them. "What is all this?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound. "These," he said, tapping the stack with his finger, "are credit cards. All of them opened within the last 18 months. All of them with staggering maxed-out balances." He pushed one of the statements toward me. It was from a major national bank. The balance was over $20,000. He pushed another one. $15,000. All told, the combined debt from all the cards was just over $85,000. And at the top of every single statement, printed in neat official type, was my name. Helen Evans. I stared at the papers, my brain refusing to connect the dots. "I don't understand," I whispered. "I haven't had a credit card in my name in years. Robert and I always paid in cash or with a debit card. We didn't believe in debt." "I know," Mr. Davis said gently. "Mark opened them for you. He stole your identity." He then laid out the whole ugly story that Frank had uncovered. About a year and a half ago, Mark had called me back in Ohio. I remembered the call vividly. He'd said his company was updating their emergency contact information for their human resources department, and that he needed my social security number, just for their official records. It had sounded so plausible, so responsible. Like a fool blinded by a mother's unquestioning love, I had given it to him without a second thought. He was my son after all. Why would I ever doubt him? He had taken that number, my name, and my spotless credit history, a history Robert and I had spent a lifetime building, and he had used it to go on a secret, wild spending spree. It was identity theft. It was felony fraud. I sank into the chair opposite his desk, my legs suddenly weak. He handed me the statements one by one. I looked through the itemized charges, my hands shaking so violently the papers rattled. The charges were for a lifestyle of pure fantasy, a life they clearly couldn't afford on his salary. There were charges for five-star restaurants I had never heard of, charges from designer boutiques in Cherry Creek where Jessica bought her clothes, charges for expensive electronics, a new laptop, a giant television, the kids' tablets. And then I saw it. A charge for over $5,000 to the very resort in Florida they had just visited. They had paid for their vacation, their escape from the burden of their mother, by stealing from me. But the most sickening charge of all, the one that made me want to be physically ill right there in that beautiful office, was a recurring monthly payment of $500 to something called the Aspen Relationship Center. I asked Mr. Davis what it was. He told me Frank had confirmed it was one of the most exclusive and expensive marriage counseling services in the state. They were using my stolen money to pay for therapy to try and save their toxic marriage. The irony was so profound, so deeply grotesque, it was almost laughable. This wasn't just about greed. It was about a deep, rotten sickness in their souls. He was drowning in debt, Mr. Davis explained, his voice full of a quiet, professional anger. His salary couldn't keep up with Jessica's spending habits and her ambition for a certain lifestyle. This was his solution. Bringing you to Denver wasn't an act of kindness, Helen. It was a calculated business decision. He needed you here so he could control the situation, so he could intercept the mail, and ensure you would never see the bills that were coming in your name. It all clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. The locked pantry wasn't just about cruelty. It was about controlling their own out-of-control budget. His desperation in the office that night wasn't just weakness. It was the raw panic of a man on the verge of being exposed. My presence wasn't a burden because of my needs. It was a burden because it was a constant, living reminder of his deceit. Armed with this mountain of irrefutable evidence, Mr. Davis went on the offensive. He filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit against Mark, not just for the property dispute, but for financial fraud, identity theft, and felony elder abuse. He attached copies of every single credit card statement as exhibits. He also filed for a permanent restraining order, citing the slashed tires, the Facebook harassment, and the false CPS report as a clear pattern of intimidation. The court date was set for 2 weeks later. The day of the hearing, I walked into the county courthouse with my head held high. Sarah was by my side, a quiet, solid presence offering her silent support. Mark was already there, sitting with his lawyer at the defendant's table. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, his suit hung on him, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked pale, thin, and utterly defeated. A shadow of the confident, successful son I once knew. He wouldn't look at me. Jessica was nowhere in sight. His lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, tried to argue that it was all a terrible misunderstanding. He claimed that I was a confused, grieving widow, that I had generously offered to help them with their finances during a tough time, and had simply forgotten about the credit cards I had authorized. He tried to paint me as senile and unreliable. Then Mr. Davis stood up. He was calm, methodical, and devastating. "Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing with authority through the small, wood-paneled courtroom. "We have presented irrefutable evidence of financial fraud. We have presented evidence of harassment and vandalism. And now, I'd like to present one final piece of evidence regarding the defendant's character and his campaign of intimidation against his own mother." He walked over to the clerk's desk and handed over a small USB drive. "This is security camera footage from the defendant's next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, recorded at 2:14 a.m. on the night my client's tires were slashed." As the video began to play on the courtroom monitors, the screen showed a dark, grainy image of my driveway. A figure in a dark hoodie crept into the frame. The figure knelt by my car. A moment later, there was the glint of something metallic in the dim light from the street lamp. Even in the poor quality footage, there was no mistaking him. It was Mark. The judge stared at the screen, his expression hardening into a mask of stone. But that wasn't even the final crushing blow. There was one more piece of the puzzle, a piece of evidence so damning, it would seal his fate completely and utterly. The grainy video of Mark, my son, plunging a knife into the tires of my car played in stunned silence in the courtroom. He couldn't deny it. It was him, clear as day under the neighbor's security light. I saw him flinch at the defense table, a man watching his own life implode on a small television screen. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, but Mark just stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape, a portrait of a man who had been caught red-handed. But Mr. Davis, my calm, methodical avenger, wasn't finished. "Your Honor," he continued, his voice resonating with gravitas as the clerk paused the video on a clear shot of Mark's face. "My client's son has attempted to portray her as mentally unstable, going so far as to trigger a fraudulent and traumatizing investigation by Child Protective Services. He has tried to paint her as the aggressor in this sad affair. But the financial fraud and the vandalism are only part of the story of his character." He walked back to his table and picked up a single sheet of paper from a folder. It looked like a simple printed email. "This, Your Honor, is a sworn affidavit from a Ms. Brenda Riley, a former colleague of the defendant's wife, Jessica Evans, from her previous job." At the mention of Jessica's name, Mark's head snapped up. His eyes were wide with a new kind of panic. This was something he clearly hadn't anticipated. "This colleague states," Mr. Davis read, his voice clear and steady, each word a hammer blow, "that for months before Mrs. Evans' husband, Robert Evans, passed away, Jessica Evans was openly discussing plans in the office for her mother-in-law to sell her house in Ohio and move in with them after his death. Ms. Riley states that Jessica referred to this plan as their inheritance strategy, and on one occasion bragged to several colleagues that her mother-in-law's house, which was fully paid off, would be the perfect solution to their ongoing financial problems." A collective audible gasp went through the small courtroom. Even the court reporter looked up from her machine, her eyes wide. This wasn't a crime of opportunity that started after I arrived, broken and grieving. This was a cold, calculated, premeditated plot. They had been circling like vultures, waiting for my dear Robert to die so they could pick the bones of our life together. They hadn't seen a grieving widow in need of comfort. They had seen a walking bank account. That was it. That was the final devastating nail in the coffin. The judge, a stern-faced woman who I later learned had a reputation for being tough but fair, had heard enough. She held up a hand to stop Mr. Davis. "I have heard sufficient evidence," she said, her voice sharp and filled with undisguised contempt as she looked directly at Mark. The ruling was swift and brutal. She found Mark fully liable for the entire $85,000 in fraudulent credit card debt. She issued a permanent 5-year restraining order, barring both Mark and Jessica from coming within 500 feet of me, Sarah's children, or the house on Maple Drive. She ordered Mark to pay all of my legal fees. And most importantly, she announced that she was referring the entire case, the documented identity theft, the felony elder abuse, the admitted vandalism, and the conspiracy to commit fraud evidenced by the affidavit, to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal prosecution. Mark sat there utterly broken. He looked like a hollow shell of a man. He finally turned and looked at me, for the first time that day, his eyes pleading, swimming with tears. He opened his mouth as if to say something, perhaps Mom, perhaps I'm sorry. But there was nothing left in me for him. No pity, no anger, just a vast, cold, empty space where a mother's fierce and unconditional love used to be. I met his gaze for a single long moment and then I turned away. As Sarah and I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright Colorado sunshine, I felt a profound sense of relief but not joy. There is no joy in watching your own child's downfall, even when he is the architect of his own destruction. It is a terrible, hollow victory. The very next day, I arranged to meet Sarah at a title company downtown. Mr. Davis was there to oversee the paperwork and ensure everything was done legally and correctly. I sat across a large boardroom table from this woman who, just a few short weeks ago, had been a terrified, homeless stranger sleeping in her car. Now her eyes shone with a quiet strength and a future she had never thought possible. I signed the last document with a firm, steady hand. It was a quitclaim deed. A simple piece of paper with the power to change lives. "Mr. Davis," I said, my voice clear and loud enough for the notary and the clerks in the room to hear, "please ensure that all of my 50% ownership rights to the property at 123 Maple Drive are transferred directly to Miss Sarah Jenkins. She is now the co-owner of the property, free and clear." Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, a choked sob escaping her. They weren't the tears of fear I had seen before. They were tears of disbelief, of overwhelming gratitude, of a profound and life-altering freedom. "Helen, I can't accept this," she stammered, shaking her head. "It's too much." "Yes, you can," I said, reaching across the table and taking her hand in mine. Her hand was warm and strong. "You and your children deserve a safe and permanent home. My name was put on that deed all those years ago as a form of protection, as a way to secure my family's future. And that's exactly what it's doing now. You and your children are my family now." Leaving Denver a week later felt like shedding a heavy, dirty coat that I had been forced to wear for too long. I didn't hate the city. In a strange way, I was grateful for it. It was the place where I had lost a son, but it was also the place where I had found my own strength, a purpose I never knew I had. I had taken their worst, most selfish intentions and turned them into someone else's miracle. I didn't need the house, and I certainly didn't need the money. All I needed now was peace. And I knew with every fiber of my being that I had to go somewhere new to find it. I found my peace in a small, quiet town nestled high in the Rocky Mountains, a place where the sky seems bigger and the air smells of pine trees and clean snow. The pace of life is slower here. People look you in the eye and smile when they pass you on the street. It's the kind of place where your neighbors bring you a pie to welcome you to the neighborhood. I used the money from the sale of my house in Ohio, the home I shared with Robert, to buy a small charming cottage with blue shutters and a wide porch swing. There's a little garden in the back where I'm learning to grow tomatoes and zinnias. It's not a grand house like the one in Denver. It's small and cozy, and it's all mine. It feels more like home than any place I've ever lived. My life is simple now, and that simplicity is a blessing. It's quiet. On Tuesday and Thursday mornings, I volunteer at the local library, reading stories to the preschool children. Their bright, innocent faces are a balm to my soul. On Fridays, I work a shift at the town's small animal shelter. I have a soft spot for the older dogs, the ones with graying muzzles and sad, knowing eyes that everyone else overlooks. I take them for slow, gentle walks. We understand each other. We've both seen a bit of the worst of the world and are grateful for a little kindness. I get regular updates from Sarah. She calls me every Sunday. She sends me pictures of the kids. Leo, once so quiet and watchful, is now a smiling, confident first grader who made the honor roll. Maya, who used to hide behind her mother's legs, is taking ballet lessons and loves her pink tutu. Sarah herself has enrolled in a local community college. She's studying to be a paralegal. "I want to help other women like me, Helen," she told me on the phone last week. "I want to help them navigate the legal system and find their own way out." The house on Maple Drive, once a cold stage for a dysfunctional drama, is now filled with the sounds of laughter, homework, and hope. It's a real home. I heard through Mr. Davis that Jessica filed for divorce from Mark shortly after the criminal charges were officially laid. I suppose even her cold, calculating heart couldn't withstand the public humiliation and the prospect of being married to a convicted felon. Mark, I'm told, took a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence, and is facing several years of probation and a mountain of court-ordered restitution payments. I try not to think about him. It's a wound that I know will never fully heal. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I'll allow myself to remember the little boy with scraped knees who used to bring me fistfuls of wilted dandelions, his face beaming with pride as if he were presenting me with a bouquet of the most beautiful roses. I grieve for that little boy. The man he became is a stranger to me, a ghost from another life. This morning I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat on my porch swing, a warm quilt wrapped around my legs. I have a rescue dog now, a sweet-natured, old golden retriever named Gus, and he was sleeping at my feet, his tail thumping softly against the wooden planks every now and then. I watched the sun rise over the jagged peaks of the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The air was crisp and cool. A neighbor from down the street waved as he walked his dog. There were no laminated rules here. No locked pantries. No one watching my every move, judging my every bite. For so long, they had tried to define me by their own twisted standards. They called me a guest, an intruder, a problem, a burden. They tried to make me feel small, invisible, and worthless. But they forgot something fundamental about mothers, about women. Our strength isn't something you can just cast aside or lock away. It's the foundation. It's the rock upon which families are supposed to be built. And when that foundation is betrayed, it doesn't just crumble into dust. It finds a new purpose. It becomes the cornerstone of something new, something better. I closed my eyes and took a deep, cleansing breath, letting the clean mountain air fill my lungs. I'm not a guest. I'm not a burden. I'm finally truly home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it was a long and difficult one to hear. My question for you is this. Have you ever had to completely redefine what the word family means to you? Let me know in the comments below. Your stories matter, and sharing them helps us all feel a little less alone in our struggles. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. You never know whose life you might touch just by being here.